Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to start tonight with some elections. So I will go ahead and ask for nominations for chair. Mayor Davis.
I nominate Councillor Rose Nicole for chair.
I accept your nomination.
I move we close.
Nominations are so close. Councillor Scully, you are claimed to the chair. Can I get a nomination for vice chair? Mayor Davis.
I nominate Councillor Caputo.
Councillor Caputo, do you accept the nomination?
I do accept.
Okay, are there any other nominations?
Move we close.
They are closed. Councillor Caputo, you are acclaimed to vice chair. Councillor Sicoli, do you have the roadmap in front of you?
I do.
Okay, you may go ahead.
Perfect. And you can confirm you took the roll call?
Roll's been taken.
Perfect. So rules of procedures, just because this meeting is being held in a hybrid format in accordance with the electronic participation policy for virtual meetings, the full corporate policy, should you be inclined, is available to review online. Staff and delegates participating virtually are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee. All cameras for virtual committee members shall remain on to ensure quorum. Members of the committee shall indicate they wish to speak by physically raising their hand. Members who are participating in person will be given the opportunity to speak first, followed by virtual participants. All members of the committee will vote by a physical show of hands. Please leave your hands raised until the chair has determined the results of the vote. In the event of a connection or service interruption that occurs, if that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All rules for delegations under the city's procedural and bylaw continue to apply. Now, moving on, are there any declarations of conflict of interest for any of the items listed on the agenda? Seeing none, we have no presentations or delegations for tonight's meeting, but we do have Joshua Scram, who's going to be presenting on item 4.1, which is the City of Brantford site plan control, site alteration, and security release process review. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Spacebar function. Perfect. So good evening, Chair and members of the task force. My name is Joshua Scram, and thank you for pronouncing that. Not too many people actually pronounce it Scram, so I do appreciate that. Intermediate planner with the city. And thanks for meeting with us this evening. So before we kind of get into the meat of the presentation and slides, just a quick overview. So we'll start by looking at site plan control and the ongoing work related to this development tool. Then Gary Peaver and I will jump into site alteration for discussion on the proposed changes to the bylaw, and then move into a brief update on surety bonds and conclude with next steps. So looking first at site plan control, in the third quarter of this year, staff had planned to advance an updated site plan control bylaw to remove that automatic requirement for site plan control for development on all lots created through a decision committee of adjustment. And really, this change was intended to provide greater flexibility and efficiency in site plan control and how it was applied really on a site-specific case-by-case basis when lots are created through consent approved by the committee of adjustment. And really, this was something that staff had often identified as being unnecessary and was a source of frustration for the development community. So as you all know, now fast forward to November, the range of development exemptions for site plan control has subsequently been expanded due to changes to the Planning Act that came into effect November 28th when Bill 23 received royal assent. So as a result of Bill 23 looking at site plan control, the definition of development in Section 41 of the Planning Act was amended to specify that development for the purpose of site plan control does not include construction, erection, or placing of a building or structure for residential purposes on a parcel of land containing no more than 10 residential units. So I'll just pan to the next slide here. So this is an appendix, and really as a short summary, site plan approval can no longer be applied to forms of residential development, such as single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, duplexes, right? So 2 dwelling units, triplexes, 3 dwelling units, townhouse dwellings on a parcel of land containing 10 or less dwelling units, multi-unit residential buildings, converted dwellings and apartment dwellings on parcels of land containing 10 or less dwelling units. Just to pan back here. So in terms of definitions and redundancies, the updated bylaw will also recognize the new City of Brantford official plan that applies to the entire municipality and remove some redundant definitions. Reference to annexed lands, reference to the County of Brant. The update also removes reference to parcel of land that are currently developing and reviewed under formal plans of subdivision and site plan control processes, such as those along Hardy Road. And then lastly, schedule updates. So the bylaw will have schedules updated to display more recent property-based mapping and references to the official plan. And then policies and schedules referencing site plan control for residential development that will provide less than 10 residential dwelling units has also been removed in order to align with Bill 23. So now looking at site alteration, the City of Brantford currently administers site processes through site alteration bylaw number 28-2011. Municipalities can pass a bylaw authorized under section 142 of the Municipal Act to control site alteration activities within an identified area of the municipality. And really that's regulating actions such as the alteration of grade and land, the placing or dumping of fill, and the removal of topsoil. So in terms of review and highlighting a few focus points, the City of Brantford site alteration permits are currently required for a number of private backyard projects and landscaping such as pools, sheds and garages, new single builds, concrete work and demolitions, some of which also require a building permit. So looking at where we are today as it relates to site alteration, over the past 2 years, staff in development, engineering, and legal have been investigating opportunities to eliminate redundancies where multiple permitting processes are regulating similar aspects of development and have begun drafting a new bylaw while completing a review of comparative municipalities. And then so alongside that, and a more recent part of this process, staff have also completed a procedural review of surrounding municipalities to understand how applicants advance through different stages of site alteration permits in order to understand the various departments, right? So reaching out to municipalities like Whitby, Waterloo, Kitchener, and Kingston. It's something simple like having a phone call to them to say, okay, well, we want to move through this process in your municipality, and how do we do it? And who do we need to contact, and what are some of the permits that are required? And so that was really an informative part for us to understand how our comparative municipalities advance those processes as well. And then from there, planning and development services looked internally. We looked at our internal processes, right? So administration processes, looking at permit counts and revenues associated with that. And then we took it a step further, focused in on internal departmental review. So not only development engineering, but also chatting with our team in building, and Andy's on the call today, and then also chatting with our ops department as well. So where we aim to be, the draft amendments include removal of requirements for swimming pool permits, right, in and on ground and above, sheds, concrete slabs additions, identifying those overlapping review processes and efficiencies with building and the permitting requirements, removal of permit fees from the site alteration bylaw, which are already captured in the fees and charges bylaw, and then site alteration requirements be removed for site plan, those overlapping redundancies. And then obviously proper staffing for enforcement of the site alteration bylaw. So I'll now hand it over to Gary to chat a little bit more about the current site alteration process in place and then the proposed changes.
Thanks, Josh. Through this process, we wanted to give a quick overview of how smaller projects like pools and sheds apply for a site alteration permit. Currently, many of the drawings are submitted by the homeowner or their contractor that are hand-drawn for many of these smaller backyard matters. And they are entered into our internal Amanda system, which is our internal computerized system for permitting. Then it is reviewed for technical detail, as well as some setbacks, zoning compliances, among other, say, localized issues. And then a pre-inspection is completed of the property, as well as in front of the property to take some pictures before the work is begun. Once the drawings are approved, generally the permits are generally submitted to the building department, because usually you're getting a building permit with the site alteration permit as well. For the instances where it is a singleized site alt without a building permit, we would directly mail that or send that via email to the applicant. Once the work is completed, the applicant would call us back to arrange for a final inspection. And during that final inspection, we would do a site visit. And as long as everything is compliant with what the drawings had laid out, we'd be releasing their securities for their work in the rear yard. So next slide, please, Josh.
Yeah.
So in the building department, they have a very similar process for these types of applications. Again, they are doing a cursory review for completeness and using their current software, Amanda, to enter into. That is something that is being updated through Cloud Permit. However, they are currently still in Amanda software. They are doing their review of zoning, Ontario Building Code, bylaws, and applicable law. And that's a key component here, that the building department is reviewing a lot of the same bylaws, zoning that site alteration was also reviewing. Once the building department received the site alteration permit, they would then be issuing the permit as their standard practice back to the applicant, and then the work begins. For many of these items, like a pool permit, there would be an inspection from the building department or bylaw department to ensure that that pool was installed correctly, safely, to ensure fencing, zoning setbacks were met, and then their file would be completed. So very similar processes for some of these smaller projects that are in your yards between both the building department and site alteration development engineering department. Next slide, please. So on this slide, it is a little small to see. This is a current process laid out for various applications that we are discussing here today, from infill lots to grading of properties to installation of various types of pools. In general, this does show that a building permit generally is required when site alteration is required for many applications. The one instance would be grading of property. Generally, that doesn't fall under the Ontario Building Code, and that's where site alteration would be the loan permit issued to the applicant through this process. In the blue would be the site alteration, the purple would be the building, and then the orange would be the planning processes. So sometimes you would see that a site plan would be required, or various planning act could be or may not be required in that instance. That is obviously changing through the various Bill 23s and items like that. However, it does show that some planning approvals would be required for some, but not all. Another example would be demolitions. If there's historic property, that would go through another planning process to ensure that that building is not on the register or there's a decision made for that particular building. Next, please. And then proposed. So in the proposed section, in general, what we're proposing here for the site alteration permit would be essentially for properties less than 1 acre in size. There would be no site alteration permit required. So generally, if your property is less than 1 acre, you're likely going to need a building permit and would be still receiving your building permit through that same avenue, but a site alteration would not be required for you to install a pool in your backyard. Both above ground, below ground pools, as well as some of the smaller items like concrete patios, rear yard sheds that would meet OBC would still require that building permit, but not a site alteration permit. Also on here, it does show that the grading greater than 1 acre of property would require a site alteration permit. Again, covering off where the municipality and staff feel that it is important for the municipalities to still ensure under the site alteration that we're protecting the environment, protecting the municipal infrastructure, as well as the neighboring properties where we can for the larger areas where grading exercises occur. When we look at properties of 1 acre, the staff did a cursory review of some of the current applications at hand to see, would this fit for Brantford? Other municipalities use various ways of determining if site alteration is required, whether it be 1 hectare versus 1 acre. An acre is smaller in size. We felt that it was more appropriate that we used an acre. It would still fit in some of those applications of development that could occur before they got approval, that we could allow for some of the earth moving to occur, issue a permit, and they could keep the work moving. Where 1 hectare is a larger size, would actually take out quite a bit more property that would be required to take out a permit. One of the other items on here again are the pools. Really, when it comes down to site alterations, we've issued some pools or permits to pools that where the permit cost was greater than the pool itself. However, for the applicant at hand, that could be another $600 out of pocket for that pool that, $600 to $1,000 when they still have to go through another permitting process through the city. Some of these pools do require other permits, like a road occupancy permit. If you're installing an in-ground pool and you have to crane it over your house, you still would have to set up a crane on the road and lift that pool over your house and get it to the rear yard. I use that example as that 2 of those occurred on my street just this summer. Next slide, please. Josh?
Yeah, so just in terms of resources and support, I think one of the more important things when we were reviewing site alt and we were having some internal discussions with various departments, one of the important things was that in addition to, staff understanding permitting processes and where permits may no longer be required, it was also important that a robust communication plan was identified in order for council and public to have resources and understand it. And I think that was kind of twofold, is obviously informing, various departments and council, but also allowing residents who may have questions a readily available resource that they can go to. And that might, in a lot of ideas around streamlining things, they don't have to wait for a phone call or they don't have to try and connect with different departments. And then I also think in terms of building, if they're reviewing something that might have previously been, something that might have first gone to development engineering, building has the resources that they can direct somebody to say, okay, well, start here. And then, if development engineering can assist, we'll put you in contact with them as well. So that robust communication plan we thought was really important. And that was kind of in collaboration with, staff and building and trying to work that. Right. So I think that that's a really important piece of the site alteration and some of the updates to it. Gary, I don't know if you want to touch on some additional considerations.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Josh. So in general, our direction site alteration permits would be not required for works affecting less than an acre of property. Again, we're seeing that quite a few of those properties do create a lot of damage. They can have significant amount of trucks coming off and on the site. And in general, we want to continue protecting the municipal infrastructure, the natural heritage infrastructure, and ensuring that those sites are being inspected more often with staff, and ensuring that they're following the guidelines set out by the municipality as well as the province. Secondly, there would be some projected revenue loss to this department. It's approximated around 80,000 per year would be lost to not receiving these permits in the less than an acre. However, in general, staff are spending much more time on those same permits that we're issuing. So right now, site alteration under these permits is not revenue neutral. And then also, site alteration is expected to recover this loss through the fees of large scale developments. We're receiving these applications quite more frequently, more often, and site alteration could be tailored to, again, where the large applications, where there's significant amount of money and capital being invested in the properties, city staff would be able to be on site more often to ensure that they're following the rules and regulations, and as well as more revenue could be captured from those larger projects, and not necessarily in the projects in the backyards of our local residential population.
So thanks, Carrie. Just in terms of next steps, looking at site plan, site alteration and security. So in terms of site plan control, in addition to removing that opportunity for comprehensive technical review of various key aspects of development for projects adding up to 10 residential units, the Planning Act has also been amended to limit matters of exterior building design from site plan control. So matters previously related to exterior design, including things like character, scale, appearance, and design, and their sustainable design, have been removed from consideration. So, I think with all these changes, with the recent legislative changes as they relate to site plan control, staff are still cautiously optimistic that through individual zoning bylaw amendment applications, some matters previously addressed under site plan control may be considered through new site-specific zoning where feasible. Staff also believe that the new comprehensive zoning bylaw, which is anticipated to be completed at the end of 2023, will provide additional opportunity to guide various key aspects of development that may have been lost through recent changes to the Planning Act. So in terms of next steps for site plan control, Implementing the direction of council, on July 26th of this year, the bylaw will be assigned to a bylaw listing at a future city council meeting. Staff also intend to bring forward additional amendments to the site plan control bylaw as necessary as work is completed on the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. The new zoning bylaw will also facilitate future and further review, updating the 2015 site plan manual. In terms of site alteration, based on the proposed changes presented today and discussed by Gary, alongside the site plan control bylaw, the site alteration bylaw will be assigned to a bylaw listing at a future city council meeting. And I think one of the key things here is staff aim to bring forward these changes in Q1 of the new year. And that ensures that prior to the spring and summer construction timeframes, members of the public and contractors are made aware of projects that may no longer be subject to site alteration permits and the requirements of these. And then in terms of security release processes, planning and development services have been working with legal services and finance in order to advance the use of surety bonds in the development process. So through report 2022-698 to the December 14th Finance Committee, staff established a corporate finance policy for securities being held by the city for subdivisions and development projects. And the policy outlines the criteria for considering types of securities and the form that they must take in regards to development agreements. So that was approved by finance on December 14th, and the report and related policies now advance to city council for ratification tomorrow. And then in addition, staff have also began utilizing the approved site plan control security posting formula recommended to the task force in June. And staff look forward to bringing future updates back to the task force in 2023. With that, that concludes the presentation. Any questions?
Perfect. We do have some questions. I have Councilor Caputo up first.
So there's a couple I have. Actually, one of them is, so if I could just have you walk me through this process, just for backyard stuff, because that's going to probably be the one that's going to come up the most.
Okay.
So if I was to propose putting in a concrete patio and a cabana and a hot tub, if that process was in the past, you had to come to the building department, you had to put down your stuff on, draw everything out, had to get a permit, had to pay for this, had to do this, had every step in place, and then I had somebody come by and take a look at what the project was supposed to be. How does that work today now, based on your proposal? Do I need a permit to go into my own backyard and do this job?
Yeah, through the chair too, Councillor. So yeah, you would require today, I would say most of those circumstances, you would require a site alteration permit as well. Generally because you'd be excavating for your concrete pad and putting that hot tub in. I'd have to get building to confirm what the building permit requirements are from the, because it's not a pool. I generally, we see pools more than hot tubs. But yes, generally you would require a site alteration permit from development engineering and a permit from the building department.
And how does that change from our current?
So that's what the current is.
Okay.
The proposed you would just be required to get a building permit. You would not require a site alteration permit anymore.
So the individual that would do this in their backyards can change it at will?
Could change their,
I mean, what he would come in and say, this is my proposal, but then I decide to change it.
Yep.
That's perfectly legal.
yes, that would be, again, your backyard. You would have the abilities to, as long as it met the criteria set out in zoning, you would be able to make those changes.
It's okay. The reason I'm asking is only because I think this almost feels like an open ticket for individuals to do what they want in their backyards and not adhering to, the bylaws that we have in place. How close to a fence line do you go? How close to your home do you go? All those situations. That you get something now, but then I can freely just do whatever I want in my backyard after I get the permit.
Yeah, so through the chair, those items you specifically said would be covered off in the building department's review under zoning. So again, or the Ontario Building Code. So if there's setbacks requirements in the Ontario Building Code, that would still be reviewed and inspected by the building department, as well as setbacks to your property line, as those are zoning matters.
Okay. I just wanted to get some clarity on that because I think at some point, there'll be a lot of individuals out in the marketplace that will just start doing things on their own without going through the proper channels.
Absolutely. To the chair, I do see Andy. I didn't know if you wanted to add something that, Andy?
Thanks, Gary. Andy McMahon, Chief Building Official. To your point, Counselor, through the chair, in those instances that you referred to, a pool permit would be required for the hot tub. Basically, we're looking at location of the hot tub in those instances for zoning purposes, as well as inspection for fencing if fencing is required. A gazebo type structure, if it's larger than 108 square feet, then that would be subject to a building permit. So we would go through the building permit process for that and inspections for that. If it's not subject to a building permit, if it was smaller than that, it would still be subject to zoning. So our bylaw office, would deal with it in that instance if there was a complaint regarding the location of it for zoning.
If I could just add to that too, I think the point too is that we're not necessarily recommending that we're deregulating these matters, but what we've identified through our process review and what we've heard from the development community, as well as recognizing our own internal processes, is that there's a lot of overlap between various departments, the building department and the site alteration in terms of the permit and the inspection. So what we're trying to do is just sort of identify that those matters can be inspected by one department through one permitting process versus having two permitting processes that are essentially looking at the same thing.
Well, thank you. I just had a feeling that at some point in time, people are going to start taking things into their own hands, and we don't know where it's going to go from that. That could cause a lot of issues going forward. I do have another question. Did I spend time at all?
You can go for it.
So you brought up single family dwelling, duplexes and so forth. Does an individual now have the right to do any modifications to their home? So a single family dwelling home can be converted into a duplex and or a triplex going forward?
So in terms of what's permitted under the zoning bylaw right now, in terms of like additional dwelling units, is that what you mean?
My neighbor decides he wants to turn his home into a duplex, or he wants to rent his basement and he's gonna add something to the backyard. How does that process work now under Bill 23, or where we're going in the future?
So in terms of applying for an additional dwelling unit within certain zones, you're already permitted to do that. And then, so we kind of already, with Bill 23 and identifying the opportunity for these additional dwelling units, we kind of already have that in place. And I would let Andy and his team speak to it, but it's already something that the city has seen and something we're actually seeing in our the west of Conklin, for example. There are additional dwelling units that we have seen additional number of permits when you're reviewing them and seeing increased density in that area already. So I'll let Andy speak to it, but I believe that we already have those in place.
I just wanted to get some clarity, as only because I saw it a lot this past summer.
Yeah.
On a lot of streets.
Yeah.
That I was unaware that it was, here's a bungalow with 3 mailboxes.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so Bill 23 allows for what the province is promoting as, they call it gentle density. So essentially what is occurring is that the municipality still has the ability to regulate what we refer to as the built form on a property. So whether that's a dwelling, apartment, a duplex, which can be a built form, but it can also be a type of dwelling that we refer to. What we have less control over now is what occurs inside the property inside the dwelling once it's constructed. So you're right, that through Bill 23, you can have up to 3 units within a dwelling. And so this is how the province is attempting to increase housing stock and what they're referring to as the increase in the gentle density. So the built form doesn't necessarily change, but the interior of the property can be broken up into 3 additional units or 3 separate units.
And there isn't any consideration for parking for any of that as well?
1 additional parking space per unit is required. Beyond that that's the limit. So we are not allowed to regulate anything beyond 1 additional parking.
So if a 1,500 square foot bungalow rents a basement, puts an addition on the back, makes it a triplex, and it's a single car driveway, where do 3 tenants park?
So in that situation, that would not be approved. So through the chair, they would have to have those 3 parking spaces on private property to still meet that requirement. So if they had a long enough driveway to fit the 3 cars, then it would be allowed. If it was without that parking requirement, if they did not meet it, they would not necessarily be able to receive those additional units.
Unless, of course, through the chair, they had to go through a minor variance exercise, and then that's comes through the planning department, if that's something we're willing to support or not.
And through the chair, now we're restricted. We can't put any policy in the official plan or any regulations in the zoning that would require them to provide any more than one space per unit. So nothing more than three.
Through the chair, just to clarify your question, Councilor Caputo, they're still in the regular course of developing or building for these 3 units in that single family bungalow. They'd still have to go through the building department to formalize any type of requirement as outlined in the building code. And maybe Andy wants to go ahead and clarify that further. They'd still need required building permits in order to do those conversions.
It's correct. All of those conversions would still require a building permit and have to comply with the building code.
Chair, and one other change though is that we also can't restrict the size of those units. There's no minimum that we can establish anymore as to how big the basement apartment can be.
Okay, moving on. I have Counselor McCurry, please.
So Gary, we lose money on sign all permit. We're losing 80 grand in revenue. Is there going to be a change to the other line in that budget?
Through the chair, there would be. Right now, we are going through a fee review through a third-party consultant. And that is a part of their review to understand the impacts of time spent versus revenue in. And one of the components they are already finding is we spent quite a bit of time on that 80,000 of revenue. We're not making that back.
My experience of all projects I've done is that it's quite onerous.
Yes.
For staff and for the building public. So with respect to backyard construction, one could build a 20 by 24 shed garage or a massive pool. In my ward, I think you've seen a little bit of that where some of the older neighborhoods have drainage that works between the backyards. And a lot of those drain courses have been interrupted by the construction of stuff that's unpermitted back in the 80s, and maybe not closely followed through the 90s. And so we got around the site also. What's our control then over the alteration to drainage courses that run along your boundaries?
Through the chair, very good question. Generally, that is left to the private owners to work themselves out. If a neighboring property changes their grade and it affects yours, you have legal right in action. That has gone through some court files just recently as well. Being able as a municipality to be involved and saying, don't place it here, you have a drainage swale. We can only permit so much. And essentially what is happening, staff are getting caught in the middle of something that's already been modified. And we're spending a significant amount of time, both engineers and legal staff, trying to essentially mediate between those two private landowners. Where there's infrastructure that is shared between and newer subdivisions, we are starting to get easements in favor of those landowners themselves to hopefully alleviate that problem in the future, but it is still a concern that municipalities will have. And that's also the importance of having that document to show various public and councillors, what are your options? My property's backed up, what can I do?
So you're saying that the municipality is implementing easements on I guess, the boundaries between properties in some cases?
In some cases, in newer subdivisions, yes, where there's a rear lot drainage system or sewer, if it's not in favor of the city, there are instances where we have been implementing that, but not all.
So with respect to the easement, then, can you explain to me how the easement goes on title, or does it go on title?
Through the chair, that would go on title at the time after registration. Generally, in our subdivision agreements, they would have been requirements or shown in the agreement that this would have to be registered. The developer would go and do so.
Is there any methodology whereby the municipality could attach covenants to properties in certain neighborhoods for certain purposes?
So through the chair, Heidi DeBreeze, General Manager, People Legislative Services and Planning. Just to clarify what Mr. Keeper is saying is that when we register new subdivisions, we are looking at things like how the drainage course may be affected by the types of uses we're seeing in these subdivisions. So we're implementing that by creating parts on the reference plans before they're created in terms of the plan of subdivision. There are opportunities in the easements themselves to identify what purpose the easement is being registered for, which would be drainage or access, depending on the type of subdivision. You're talking about as a solution to existing subdivisions, that's much more difficult. And typically that's where we end up in the situation Mr. Peeper identified before, where the municipality is not in a position to negotiate new easements over private property because the subdivision would have already been created, nor to create covenants in terms of restrictive covenants. Register on title have to be restrictive, and therefore they can't be positive in nature. They have to prohibit people from taking certain steps. And typically you don't see municipalities doing those sorts of things because taking away land rights engages a whole different piece of legislation that we like to avoid.
That's where I was headed with this, with respect to the proliferation of second and third units in some single-family neighborhoods. I understand that that's being done in some neighborhoods in Calgary. And I don't really understand the mechanism. Maybe that's something for another discussion. My one other question, if I understand correctly, with respect to release of securities, we're looking now at more of a progressive release whereby a developer, such as a developer who does infill houses, is required to maintain his entire security if he only owes us one replacement shrub.
Yes, so in terms of our new security formula, the previous security formula, there was kind of an upset limit in terms of $350,000 and then 50% of the additional. And so the new formula really looks at 50% of the total amount. And then when we're talking about kind of things outside of what would be the site plan boundary, things in the municipal right of way, those would be taken at 100%. And obviously, municipal infrastructure. But then in terms of our review process and how those things are released, yeah, definitely trying to identify some efficiencies in terms of how we review them. And then also the timeframe for when we review them, right? Because I think previously the applicant would say, well, okay, it's December and there's a foot of snow and can you come out and have a look at this? And so now identifying these windows for when we can actually see tree growth and obviously having a staff complement in Gary's team where we can have somebody out to say, okay, that I don't know, white pine has taken a year and we can release those landscaping securities that I think, has had the opportunity to grow and mature.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could just add to that, sorry. What Josh didn't touch on though was that we generally do release 90%. And but recognizing what we squabble over is the 10% that's held back for landscaping. And the challenge Josh is definitely addressing is oftentimes we received one today. We're required to do an inspection on a snow-covered lot. It's hard to tell whether or not there's any landscaping there, whether or not it's actually going to live and survive the winter season into the spring. However, under new Bill 23, landscaping is no longer a component to which we are allowed to regulate through site plan control. So the likelihood of seeing landscaping as the component of security in the future will drastically go down.
As well as the likelihood of seeing anything taller than blade of grass.
There may be, we're still getting into the legislation. I don't want to make promises, but there is some nuances around public safety and nuisance and things of that nature, because we do definitely have arguments over the purpose of a shrub or whatnot, but in many instances, the landscaping serves an important buffering component. And so I think it's important that we look to see if there are opportunities to consider some components of landscaping. But I think the likelihood over the squabble over the tree is definitely something that's been identified in this new legislation and is no longer something we're able to regulate, at least in the way that we have been.
Mayor Davis, please have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think it might be helpful if you could prepare a template response for us when a constituent, when a resident has a complaint about something that previously could have been addressed. We could say the councilor, the mayor could send it and it just says, previously we could have done something about this, but now thanks to Bill 23, we can.
Yeah,
I say that
absolutely.
facetiously, but
No, you're right, though. I think we have talked about that. We talked about in our previous planning committee meeting, the need for a graphic diagram to explain what I just referred to previously, as in, we can still regulate built form and it has to comply to zoning. What happens inside is slightly different. In terms of changes to grading, things that we used to regulate under site plan, we've talked about the need for a strong and aggressive communication plan to the public and almost a script for members of council that in some instances, we may not have a solution. And in some instances, we may not have actually even had the ability to regulate those things in the first place. But it's providing information to the homeowner about where they can go to seek a resolution or a solution, because that we can offer, even if we are not necessarily the party to solve the matter. So absolutely, like that information will be coming. We'll be working pretty closely with Maria and her group through communications, provide some materials that will provide assistance to members of council and have that information available on our website as well.
well, one thing I suggest you consider doing, you gave us the two diagrams here. I think you did it. Maybe in the first one, which is the current process and what won't carry through, you can just like take a red X and run that through that section. So you can tell at a glance what previously we could have done and what we now can't do. Question for you about the backfilling of pools. What's the difference between a backfilling pool and regular pool?
So through the chair, good question to you, Mayor. The backfilling of pools are typically the closure of an in-ground pool. So an in-ground pool is either at its life or the homeowner no longer wishes to have that pool. They have to bring in some fill and fill that up to a grade and remove the hole where the in-ground pool was.
Okay, so that still requires a site plan.
That would, through the chair, that would not require a site plan, and through the chair, that would not require a site alt unless the property was greater than an acre.
Okay. So question through you, Madam Chair, to Andy. Andy, is it possible someone wants to convert their single family home to having 3 tenants? So like an internal 3-plex. Can you see that happening without them needing a building permit?
Through the chair to Mayor Davis, no, that should not happen without a building permit. A building permit is always required when you're increasing the number of residential units. Even if it's a situation where, because of the layout, they're not even proposing any work to do this, it's still a requirement to get a building permit for a change of use for adding a unit, and they would have to comply with the building code and apply for the permit and have inspections.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily well known, and maybe there should be some public education on that. Another question I have for you is at page 9 of the report, which is page 10 of 18 of the compiled record. The last paragraph says, planning staff are cautiously optimistic, blah, 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 that the new comprehensive zoning bylaw will provide additional opportunities to guide various key aspects of development that may have been lost through the recent changes under Bill 23. What in particular is that referring to? What do you think you might be able to recover or continue doing?
Some of them, I think some of the things that we've identified, such as some of the things that have been eliminated through Bill 23. So exterior elements, potentially even landscaping are just 2 examples of things that we would look to potentially regulate through other or various aspects of the zoning bylaw.
So you can't consider landscaping in the site plan,
Right.
but you're thinking added into the zoning bylaw.
We're looking to see what our options are.
So then it becomes a factor when they apply the building permit.
That's right.
So it means building department staff will need some additional training.
It's possible, yes.
Possible.
Well, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Through the chair to the mayor, if I could, Joe Muno, manager of development planning, there's also that option of when we say we want additional, say 60% fenestration on a commercial building, or set some minimum standards for the amount of landscaping on a front yard. That's not really something that the building department will need to know. They just need to say, what's in this building matrix? It's in the permit. Does it comply to zoning? Yes or no? Right? So it either goes to minor variance or it goes to a rezoning or they comply, depending on what they're seeking relief for. And those are just ideas that we're going to speak to our consultant about, who's doing the new zoning bylaw project for the city.
Are there any other aspects of a build that you might be able to address through the new zoning bylaw that previously would have been picked up through site plan?
Yeah, through the chair to yourself, I think there's some items that we're noticing through applications that may get missed through site plans, such as driveway widths, front yard, again, to front yard items, how much green space is in that front yard? Because if that's a zoning item, we may not be able to speak to what it actually is, the type of plants, but we'd be able to guarantee or say the zoning sets out that a 60% front yard can't be paved. And so if that zoning is able to be firm, the building department through their zoning review would be able to confirm that. Again, we don't get to speak to the type of material or the plant species that are going to be there, but that hard surface could be reduced through the new zoning review.
So 2 last questions about swimming pools through Madam Chair. So we have been trying to address that issue involving the Secretariat and the search for missing children in areas where there is a need to be mindful of that. And I know we've been adding that as a condition into permits for swimming pools, because that involves usually some digging. How are we going to address that under this new system?
So through the chair, we have similar language that we can utilize for building permits. So what it is, it's a notice that is then issued to the permit holder saying that they are required to provide either notification or consultation with the survivor secretariat within the search area, which we're calling the red zone in terms of our mapping. That mapping is provided in our GIS system. It's accessible to the building department as well, and it's being implemented across the city. So public works permits have the similar language. We have a notification portal, and we share information on permits across the board. So whether it's a building permit, site alteration permit, a planning act application, or a right-of-way permit, or street cut, all of these are going through the same process where notification is put right into the actual permit. And we have a notification system where we load that permit into the SharePoint site. The survivor secretariat has a portal into the site so they can see those things in real time.
Last question about swimming pools. So what I typically have seen after the fact is swimming pool constructed and it's affected drainage. And somehow it's created a pooling on neighbor's property, or it's diverting water that otherwise would not have flowed onto the neighbor's property, onto the neighbor's property. So how are you going to address that issue if you're no longer going to be doing site plans for pools?
Yeah.
Be picked up through the building permit?
Through the chair to you, Mayor, some of those items would not necessarily be picked up to the building permit. Again, I think the public outreach of your options, if you have concerns of your neighbor constructing items in their backyard, whether it was a simple garden bed or a pool, both could easily cause the same amount of perceived flooding or pooling of water on your property, and laying out what their options are. Again, we're seeing it not just with pools, we're seeing it with flower beds, we're seeing it with small little concrete patio stones that are set a few inches higher than their fence. And yet ponding is now on the adjacent homeowner's property. So therefore, again, a permit would not have been required, may not have been caught. So I think the key is definitely the public outreach of their options, whether it is working with their neighbor to alleviate those issues or hiring a professional consultant that could look at the actual drainage pattern as an engineer or a surveyor and provide instances where they could get drainage away from their property and to the street or to the outlet that was already established.
Or they hire a lawyer?
Through the chair, that is correct. And it ultimately lead to that potential of hiring that lawyer and getting their opinion on the items, but also having the other professionals to support that lawyer in making the decision to move forward.
But my experience has been, through you, Madam Chair, that adjoining landowners that are impacted, they expect the city to do something. Right. So I guess you're telling me we can't. so long as it complied with the minimum requirements of the building permit, since site plan will no longer be required and the homeowner is basically on their own.
Through the chair, yeah, site alteration permit would not be required and they would be on their own with some of these private landowner items.
Okay, thank you. Sandra.
Thank you. I do have some questions, but I think we'll go to Councillor Carpenter first, and then I'll wrap up. Councillor Carpenter, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. I really like the body of the work on the report and how you put it together. The appendix C, for example, I think the mayor touched on it. Are we going to make sure that that appendix is shared widely so that when people, councilors could even send that out when someone says what's required, we can simply send this out to them and they'll have an idea of what's required for what they may or may not want to do?
Through the chair to yourself, Councillor, absolutely. We'd refine it and make it a little more complete and ready for the public to view and have that to be able to send out.
Yeah, that's very good. Now, the in-ground pool backfill, I wanted to just touch on that a little bit. Currently, now, as it stands now, you require a site alteration for backfilling of a pool because you're bringing in a lot of soil and you're actually not allowed to bury the pool. You're supposed to take the pool out. For example, if it's a steel-sided pool, you have to pull that out of the ground and then fill the hole. Going forward, though, we'll have no way of knowing what was filled and what wasn't filled and how it was filled, will we? Because requirement, no building permit required, no site alteration permit required, there's no eyes on it.
Through the chair, that'd be correct. The municipal staff would not know what exactly was backfilled in that property.
Yeah, and I've been some of these site alterations in the ward where they were done without knowledge of ours. So the areas where we have easements ourselves for our own drainage, for example, we've got storm sewers running through many backyards in the community. How we address our own easements on that when we're the actual person that would be taking action, or the body that would be taking action.
Through the chair to you, Councillor Carpenter, just to confirm your question, how would we be aware of those items happening and ensuring that our storm system is being maintained and not being impacted?
Yes.
Yeah, so through the chair to yourself, Councillor, that would fall back to, I say, Public Works' minimum maintenance standards of that infrastructure. So if that infrastructure is a underground pipe and storm sewer system, they would have their minimum maintenance timelines of having that inspected and generally would hopefully catch that and be able to see that there might be an issue there. Other times.
Sorry, Gary. Yeah, I got that. No, but that would mean that we'd have to be up to date on all those. So we have a number of, in my ward, Brentwood Park, for example, we had a number of rear lot drainages where the storm sewers run through the backyards and grades have been changed and storm sewers are not working effectively. How will we, I don't even think we have the easements on all those lots, or would we have to update our catalog or inventory to show us where easements are, where these exist in the first place? Would we have to upgrade those to under this current rules?
So through the chair to the councillor, the city did undertake a fairly extensive easement project a few years ago. I think it might actually have been 4 years ago now, where we hired a staff member to identify all of those easements and to place them in our GIS system. So they are for the most part mapped. The second stage of that easement project was actually to identify those easements that are not registered on title, or we may have to acquire additional title. So for the most part, our GIS layers are, based on my previous knowledge, up to date, but we can certainly look into that and see where that's at in terms of the public works system, so that we are now aware of where the city infrastructure is, where we have easements, where we have other legal obligations or rights to enter. And that project actually put us much further ahead than where we were before with respect to this particular issue.
And would there be ability for councilors to get at that, for example, so that if an easement drainage was changed in a backyard, for example, that affected our easement, then we would become one of the people that would be involved as a litigant to try and fix that problem. How will we become aware of that as councilors when we're advising constituents?
So through the chair, I can take that back and we can have that discussion with the
Sure.
public works team in terms of notice to members of council where it's come to our attention through the minimum maintenance investigations that there may have been alterations to the grade that are now affecting the city's rights, and prior to the commencement of any litigation. Of course, only council can really approve litigation where the city is plaintiff, except in exceptional circumstances where there is an emergency, in which case the city solicitor has delegated authority. But for the most part, those reports come to council where we seek direction from council to commence that litigation. So you would be aware through that process, but I can certainly undertake to speak with the Public Works Commission to determine what their process would be, where they identify that certain rights of the city have been impacted through backyard works that have not been permitted.
Okay, and a couple of quick questions for our chief building official, Andy. Andy, with the in the report, it talked about item 11, talked about the issuance of the final certificate. How often do we have applicants come back and get an actual something in writing that their application is signed off, that it's complete, they met all the requirements of the building certificate, the permit, and then they're now signed off? Is that very common or very rare?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Carpenter, that's a very common thing that we do. We issue a completion certificate or an occupancy certificate for most permits that we do issue once the work.
So even like a
completed and
backyard shed that was over 108 square feet, for example, they get something in writing saying that they're signed off.
They do, and as was mentioned earlier in the meeting by Mr. Peaver, we're moving to a new system where all of our permits will be online and they will get automatic email notifications of such once that happens.
Much easier, yeah. Now with this new process, this will require some extra staff in your department on the sounds of things, and that would all be covered on your building permit fees anyways, and we wouldn't have a problem there, would we?
We're not proposing any new staff at this point in time. We're going to wait and see how things go. Right now, we feel that we're adequately staffed, but that is something that we keep an eye on. And if we do need to request more full-time positions, we will do that.
And that comes out of the building fees, which has surplus in it anyways. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, quick question for me. Page 6 of the report, 9.1.1, where site plan approvals are concerned. This sort of came up at our planning committee. I see semi-detached dwellings listed here and townhouse dwellings are less than 10. So my brain is very confused, and I'm hoping you can lay this out for me, because a semi-detached would be like, are we getting into suddenly we can sever lots all of a sudden? Because this would be the difference between a duplex and a semi-detached is 2 different parcels of land. They're registered, 2 different parties of ownership. So I got a parcel of land in West Brand. I put up a semi-detached. It's now automatically severed into a
So you're,
Can you explain that to me?
so I would maybe defer to Joe in terms of the committee of adjustment and severance process, but if you're talking about a separate parcel of land that would need to go through a consent process.
So it's saying it's no longer required.
So I think through the chair to yourself, you're
Site
just,
plan
yeah, the discussion on the semi-detached dwelling is generally on 2 parcels of land
Yeah.
versus not.
Oh, okay.
I think there is the scenarios that we could be getting a site plan application where 4 semi-buildings are being proposed as a site plan, and then potentially a plan of condominium come in to separate those out and create a condominium. It could be a scenario where that site plan, those dwelling units could be created not through site plan, and then a condominium application come in.
So just so I'm understanding, 1 parcel of land, someone cannot just come in and build a semi-detached,
And then sever it.
and then all of a sudden it's deemed severed because it's as of right. Okay. And same with the townhouse dwellings. Is there any restriction to whether those are like a parcel of tied land versus a condo? Does it?
Through the chair, the as of right permissions don't extend to the creation of a lot. Like, you have
Okay.
to have
Well,
your
yes.
semi-detached already on a lot. Now you can
Okay.
turn that semi into a duplex or have 3 units on that lot, but the permission doesn't extend to them. For
So we're
example, taking a single lot automatically says splitting it in 2 to create a semi. And then
So
and
where it
then
says a site
separating
plan
it, splitting
approval
out
is,
further.
where it says a site plan approval is no longer required for a semi-detached, that is a semi-detached is on the lot and they are rebuilding a semi-detached?
That's correct. So it would be, the zoning would allow for the semi-detached to be there, right? And you're talking about the process to sever those two individual.
I'm not
dwellings.
talking about the severance. I'm saying if somebody has a parcel of land and they have, as of right, the ability to build a semi-detached.
It would not.
And maybe it's just the wording of the report, which is why I'm asking. Okay.
So to the chair, I think the hangup is on the underlying discussion about land ownership and how that works. And what we're talking about is what our chief planner referred to as the built form. And then there's what you can do once the built form has been established. So I think it would be best if we just take that back and we're gonna set this all out in a very clear pictorial with a very clear chart to show what you can do in terms of you own the parcel of land. There's one owner. We're not creating any separate lots. We're not severing. What does the built form look like? How do we regulate that? And then once the built form has been established, what can happen inside that? So
And the
I just
difference
wanted
is
to make
between
sure.
when something is already constructed
Yeah.
versus new construction.
Okay.
Two different things now.
Perfect. I just saw that in there and it gave me a flashback to planning and I thought, oh, I
Yes.
better
No, and
make sure I understand it.
We're preparing that graphic
Okay.
information memo for council for January. So we'll have that released and then available to our public slightly in a slightly different form for the public, but that information available to the public too.
Understood. Mayor Davis, did you have?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Okay. So if I understand Bill 23, so if you're going to do that triplex, it has to be within the same building. You can't use Bill 23 to justify as of right adding an addition, which would be the third unit. Is that correct?
through the chair, you can actually have a unit in the, like you have a detached garage.
Yeah.
You can place one of the units there as well.
But if I have, let's say I've got a duplex and I want to make it into a triplex, thinking Bill 23 allows me to do that, I can do that so long as I'm not adding on to the outside wall, like adding an addition at the back. Is that right?
Well, through the chair, I think we might need a pictorial on this because you can still put additions onto existing dwellings so long as you're complying with the zoning bylaw, which would then require a building permit, not a site plan, and you can expand the usability. It's not like, I think where our minds are going is the legal non-conforming uses where you're limited to the existing built form and you can't expand it all to increase the usability. That is not the case. So you may be able to add additions. What you can't necessarily do is, and you can even build a detached garage and put a unit in the detached garage. So
Because I thought there was wording in Bill 23 that said it had to be within the building itself. Like, couldn't change the building.
I think there's the one additional unit.
yes,
Yeah.
Okay. One other question I have, which Gary came into something that you said, which caught my attention, so you're telling us that someone could have a piece of land and they construct 10 townhouse units, so no site plan control, but they're not going to be selling them as freehold, it's going to be condos. So all they need to do is get a building permit and then.
Well, through the chair to your mayor there, they could come in for a building permit for the 10 units.
Right.
And construct that through their building permit. But in order to complete that condo, they would have to apply for a plan of condominium application to the planning department.
Okay. And many of the issues we're trying to address through the condo declaration and whatnot, to prevent many of the nightmare scenarios we've seen happen. Are you going to still be able to do that through having to apply for the condo?
The plan of
Plan of
condominium.
condominium. Yep, there's still a registered condo agreement and there's still a declaration that's required.
So you'll still be able to address those issues even though you no longer can do site plan?
There's still we can still regulate a lot of that through the condominium agreement. And then and we're even exploring where we don't typically review the declaration, the condo declaration. We can review it from the perspective that certain provisions have been added into the declaration to advise the property owners.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, so we do have a motion here and I'll read it out and then I'll ask for a mover and a seconder. that report 2022-727 City of Brantford Site Plan Control Site Alteration and Security Release Process Review Q4 2022. Update B received. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councilor Caputo, seconded by Mayor Davis. Any discussion on the resolution? The motion. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Councilor Carpenter, are you in favor? Okay. No one opposed. The motion has carried. We have no consent items, no notice of motions, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.